Patch 3.25, Settlers of Kalguur, is upon us. So then, how are we going to play the Hexblast Miner Saboteur in this patch? This is a really interesting, unique and fun build. Let's get into it. I'm going to be showing you everything you need to know to succeed. First up, let's have a little watch of the play and actually talk about how it works and what we're really doing with this build. So the main gem that it revolves around is, of course, Hexblast. We are going to be playing Saboteur. Hexblast is a really interesting gem, and it basically does ranged chaos damage, but it does have some downsides. And don't worry, we're going to up those downs, or turn that, isn't it turn that frown upside down? Well, that's what we're doing here with the Hexblast gem. So it's got a really long cast time, and this is what mainly drags it down. However, we can offset this by using it with mines, as they get to obviously bypass that feature. Other than that, it gains ridiculous damage if the enemies have a hex on them, which is why we are so invested into making sure an enemy always has one of our hexes applied to it when we are using this gem. So basically how it actually plays is like a caster because of a mine mastery, which is going to automatically detonate our mines while we are moving. Effectively then, you're just throwing mines which will instantly explode, and thus it kind of plays like a caster. So on the actual pros and cons of it, we're going to be doing screen-wide explosions with really high damage. And it also has a basically limitless ceiling, even way past the guide I'm going to be showing you today. However, the downsides are going to be that even though it does huge damage, it's offset with being quite squishy still. And you can't really level with it until you have a source of curse on hit. It can lose a bit of early damage as well in the recent patches. However, I'm not going to let that go. I think we should still have a lot of fun with this. If we talk about how easy it is to play, I think the playstyle is really super fun, but for a new player, it can take a little bit of getting used to. Gearing isn't the easiest as well, and it's not the most easy executable build. As you can see here, we're having to place quite specific things in places where we're putting our traps, etc. But, you know, I'm comparing this to kind of like walking simulator builds and things like that, where really there's just no brain cells even involved. So it's definitely not something that's like really difficult to do. The only thing I would try and avoid on map modifiers for this one would be your reduced recovery rate. Everything else is going to be absolutely fine. There's no sort of specific damage mods, etc. that we're trying to watch out for in this build. If we look at scaling our Hexblast through the mines, we can get massive damage, like I said before, and basically it's just cast speed. So the mines are going to cast, so they're going to bypass the cast times, and they're really reliant on the mine throwing speed to do their thing. So basically, like I said before, really high cast speed on Hexblast, but we're using mines to bypass that, and therefore we want to get mine throwing speed. Mine throwing speed is the only thing that will actually technically hold you back if you don't have a lot of. So that isn't also bound to a skill, remember. This means that long cast time skills are actually ideal for this one, because we can get them out with our mines. And the build does leverage a lot of mine throwing and throwing speed to get a ton of mines out there, and it can feel really fantastic. Other than that, it tries to not get hit too often, because I did say it is a bit squishy, and then we can keep the mapping fun, but we're not giving up much single target damage, so we can keep enjoying that nice big Hexblast playstyle. Now let's move me over here quickly and start looking at the gems. So we're not going to have the full build together straight away, obviously. What we're going to go for really early on is Stormblast Mine with added lightning damage and swift assembly so that we can get them out faster with some added damage. We're also going to go for Orb of Storms with, again, Arcane Surge and added lightning damage. You can go for Flame Dash and Frostbite to get some speed out of there. And then Clarity and Summon Skitterbots for a bit of defensiveness on there as well. And also, obviously, to detonate those mines. I have put PoB in the description, as always, and there are multiple steps for you as we go through this. When we're coming out of the axe, generally by this point, you should have everything pretty much together, and it's going to look something like this. So let's talk through them. Starting off, of course, with our main 6-link on Hexblast. This will change a little bit once we get into mid-game, and I'll talk through that in a second. So what does Hexblast actually do? Let's have a look at the tooltip. Deals chaos damage to a single enemy, dealing more damage if they are hexed, remember. So we always want to be hexing our enemies. Then removing the hex. If the enemy was hexed, it also deals area damage to other enemies around the target, boosting damage and removing hexes from those enemies in the same way. So we're putting on increased critical strikes on here. Very obvious what that does. And then, remember I said at the start how we're getting around the long cast time? Well, we're going to use high impact mines. This is going to change this into throwing a mine instead of casting the spell. And then charged mines is a support on top of this. Basically, this is just going to be increasing damage of the mines alongside a few other things. And then minefield. Imagine a minefield has tons and tons of mines around. Well, that is exactly what this gem does. It basically increases at a foundational level how many mines that you are putting out there into the field. And then we're adding in some chaos damage to that as well. Just quickly flipping through to the mid game, you can see all we're basically changing is Awakened Void Manipulation. If you don't know what Awakened is, these are more powerful and expensive versions of these gems. Now, if I've put Awakened on here, then this is basically the gem that I think you should be trying to get Awakened with, because they are very expensive. We're not obviously getting them all of them, and the ones on here are the ones you should try and go for. Basically, what the Awakened Void Manipulation does is it's going to add more chaos damage to this spell. For our aura setup, we're going with Val Grace. This gives you an extra chance to be evading attacks. You've got your Wither setup over here. 3 on here, Wither, Spell Totem, and then multiple totems. So one thing that I want to talk about actually with the Wither setup is flammability down here. I haven't got a link to the gem, unfortunately. But what this does is it reduces the target's resistance to fire elemental damage. And the way this build works is that it's going to be doing chaos damage against the lower of any of their elemental resistances. So we're just specifically choosing to reduce fire damage, which will then actually mean we can have fire damage as their lowest resistance, and therefore we're doing more chaos damage to them. Hopefully that makes sense. But it basically makes Wither mandatory for this build. What we want to do is drop the Wither on our bosses or whatever we're attacking before we front load all of our mine damage onto them. If you don't know what Wither does, basically we can put this in an area around them that is going to slow them and also wither them, which basically increases how much chaos damage they take. This build is of course doing chaos damage, which is why we're going to wither them before we put in all of our big juicy Hexblast damage. To make sure that we're keeping up, especially on bosses, the actual Wither effect. That's why we're using the Spell Totem gem. Basically, what this is going to do is it's going to turn that Wither into a totem emitting that Wither effect around it on the boss, etc. And that's going to stay up for X amount of seconds. The multiple totems link is then going to make it so that we can use multiple totems for that, massively increasing how much Wither we're actually getting out there onto the battlefield. So again, just to recap on what's actually happening there, the Wither is going to increase chaos damage taken. Our Hexblast, etc. is going to be doing chaos damage. Flammability is reducing their flame or fire resistance. And our chaos damage will be actually doing damage based on the lowest of their elemental resistances, which will be fire. And then we're putting totems and then multiple totems out there. Basically totems of Wither around to, well, wither them and increase how much chaos damage they take and slowing them down. For some defenses, we've got Immortal Call and Cast when damage taken. This is going to basically literally reduce your physical and elemental damage taken and will be triggered at a threshold when any damage is taken automatically with the Cast when damage taken link is on there. So just some really simple defensivenesses. Oh my God. Whatever the word is, some extra defensive abilities on there for you. Lastly, we've got Bear Trap, and this is again just going to increase how much damage our enemies are taking from us. And then we can go with Shield Charge with faster attacks and momentum, speeding that up, charging in. And then it's really up to you if you want to go for Frost Blink or Flame Dash for some movement speed on there as well. Now that we've gone through gems, we're going to go on to the gear. One thing I really do quickly want to mention regarding the gems still is the Profane Proxy Ring that we are going to be using and just how this works again with our hexes. So, Because we do have the Whispers of Doom notable on this build, don't worry if you don't know what it means, I'm kind of going to explain this. We are actually able to put 2 different hexes on our enemies, which are going to be, of course, Elemental Weakness and then our Flammability, which are these 2 down here. Either one of these can then go into our Profane proxy, so whichever one you do not have as a curse on hit on your other ring is the one that you're going to basically put into here. So you can see on here, left ring slot, your Chilling Skitterbots aura applies Socketed Hex Curse instead. Right ring slot, your Shocking Skitterbots aura applies Socketed Hex Curse instead, etc. So just do be aware that that is something we really want to go for on this build. So now to actually go through the rest of the gear. The first thing I want to say is if you are new, or even if you're not new, then please do remember to get your resistances up. This is really, really important. General resistances over 75, cap them out, and then as much chaos as you can get. There's not really too many uniques that I'm putting on this build, really, apart from the Profane Proxy Ring. The rest of them are pretty much yellows at this point. A few things I would really love you to look out for, however. Let's have a look at this Lion Pelt Helm here, for example. We've got on here critical strike chance on spells, but really importantly, damage penetrates 5% of fire resistance. Again, we're trying to get their resistances down, flammability and elemental weakness on this build, and therefore having stats like this on our gear would be really, really important for getting through those resistances that they still do have. If you can get from Benchcraft on here, like you can see at the bottom, increased mine throwing speed. That, of course, for throwing out those mines as quickly as possible and as fast as possible is going to be really, really important. Apart from that, extra maximum life, and again, your resistances is going to be really good. Evasion is going to be really good on the armor. Got a lot of evasion, energy shield on my chest here. Again, critical strike multipliers. On the boots, I always love to go for improved movement speed whenever possible. Chance to avoid being chilled is going to be fantastic here. Again, maximum life, resistances, suppress spell damage. It's all pretty standard stats really on this build. There's nothing too exciting. Again, on the belt, I'm trying to go for increased trap and mine throwing speed as well. Wherever you can get this, it's going to be really, really useful for you. On my wand here, I'm going for, can have up to 3 crafted modifiers. Massive increase to mine damage here. You can see here 49%, and increased mine throwing speed yet again here. Anything adding 1 to chaos spell skill gems, or just any skill gems, are going to be really fantastic for this, but especially chaos spell ones for that. So pretty standard, I feel, on these ones. Moving on to the flasks I am using in this build, I've got a Chemist Diamond Flask of the Cheetah. Again, always looking for reduced charges per use and some movement speed on there. Again, reduced charges and increased evasion. Again, on the Chemist Jade Flask of Incision and Chemist's Stibnit Flask of the Owl here, creating a smoke cloud on use, reduced charges per use, and again, 62% effect of curses on you during that effect. For the Life Flask, then, I'm going for the Bubbling Divine Flask of Aswagjing. Reduced amount recovered. Massive increased recovery rate on here. Recovery applied instantly and grants immunity for bleeding if used while bleeding. Of course, always on Life Flask there. Granting immunity to corrupted blood as well. Moving now on to the jewels. Again, I feel like there's nothing really that exciting happening on the flasks for this build. For your large cluster jewel, adding 8 passive skills is going to be really, really useful on this one. You can see here 2 added passive skills are jewel sockets, and added small passive skills grant 12% increased chaos damage. Again, chaos damage being really important in this build. Adding 1 passive to Touch of Cruelty, Unholy Grace, and Unwaveringly Evil are the ones that I'm looking to go for on here. Unless this does have 3 notables and 8 passives, I really wouldn't recommend getting a large jewel cluster. On the medium one, again, going for more passives, adding more jewel sockets, and adding trap damage. And I like to go for Expert Sabotage and Guerrilla Tactics on there. For your pretty much normal ones, we're pretty much going for 4 specific things here. And that is Critical Multiplier for spell damage, increased damage overall, increased life, and increased mana. It really is that simple. I feel like this build is really quite straightforward. It's not as interesting as some of the other ones that I am covering. By the way, check out the playlist on my channel because I am doing a hell of a lot of builds in Settlers of Kalguur 3.25 for you, both League and Endgame builds of all different kind of styles and play styles. Now that we've been through the gear and the gems and the playstyle, let's then finish off by looking at our Pantheon, Ascendancy, and what to do about Bandits. Everything else, basically. All the little bits and bobs. Now, I love going through the Ascendancy. It's one of my favourite bits because I feel like it adds so much power to the build. And of course, we are going for Saboteur. So, number one is going to be a Demolitions Specialist up here. So we're going to come through there, Area of Effect and Mine Throwing Speed. If you're new to PoE, these are just the two things that these miners add. And then when we get Demolitions Expert, which again is our first one, 150% increased effect of auras from your mines, which is obviously absolutely massive. We're then going to come up to Pyromaniac, getting area of effect and more mine throwing speed as we go up. Pyromaniac, immune to ignite and shock, regenerating life for every trap that you are placing up to a maximum of 10% per second. So that's just a really good all-rounder, I believe, on that one. Then we're going to come up here, again, area of effect and elemental resistances, and then to Explosives Expert. 40% increased critical strike multiplier against burning enemies, 80% increased crit against shocked enemies, and damage that penetrates 10% elemental resistances against chilled enemies. And remember, we are using the elemental resistances on our target in this build to then apply more chaos damage, which is where this one comes in. Lastly, we're going to Born in the Shadows with Area of Effect and Blind. So this is specifically giving a 15% increased blind effect. Born in the Shadows gets really interesting where you cannot be blinded. You then take 15% reduced damage from blinded enemies, and nearby enemies are also blinded as well. This all works symbiotically, and it's one of my favourite ones for the Saboteur. Another thing that we're going to mention here is your Pantheons. This obviously happens after the Mudflats in Act 5 or 6. And basically, the two that we're going to go for, Major God, Soul of the Brine King. This is going to give you freeze immunity, etc. And then the last one is going to be the Soul of the Abera. Very simple options on your major and minor gods there. Lastly then, what are we going to do about the Bandits? Well, because we do want the passive skill points really badly in this build, as you can see on our jewels, we're adding in a lot of passives on here, then we are going to kill all bandits. Could go over Lyra really early on, but in my opinion, it's not worth it. We might as well just kill them all for the later game progression. And that is pretty much it for how we are going to be playing the Hexblast Miner Saboteur build in patch 3.25 Settlers of Kalguur. Hopefully this video was useful for you. Do leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you liked it. Obviously thumbs down if you didn't, but either way, thank you for watching. I appreciate you either way. If you would like any extra help on this build, do feel free to reach out through Patreon. You can sign up there and get one-on-one support with me, or also join the Discord. There's a VIP channel as well that you access through Patreon, which will give you one-on-one help from the community. I am a very small YouTuber, and I do put out a lot of these guides for ARPGs, PoE, Diablo, and the like. And it really is appreciated if you would consider signing up, because that is the main way to support the channel and make sure that these videos keep on coming. If you are looking for other build guides, however, do click this playlist up here. I am doing a hell of a lot of them for this patch for you. And of course, have fun. This is definitely one of my favourite patches so far. It is insane what they're bringing into the game, and hopefully you are just as excited as me to get in and play it.